Preparing 3D file. Lumion is an amazing program for visualization, but it's not for modeling projects. So if we have a project that we need to visualize in Lumion, we will need to first model it in another 3D program like 3ds Max, SketchUp, Cinema 4D, AutoCAD, Rhino, or Revit. So before we import our 3D modeled files into Lumion, we will need to prepare them first to make our workflow smooth and easy. In this lesson, I am going to cover the most important concepts that we need to understand while preparing our 3D files before we use them in Lumion. I will be working with 3ds Max because that's my preferred software for 3D modeling, but the concepts of these preparations applies to other 3D software as well. So let's get started. So here is a finished twin villa design project that we did earlier. Modeling done in 3ds Max, rendering and materials were done using V-Ray. Let's learn the concept of how to prepare this file. So concept number 1, apply materials placeholders. In our project, we need to have materials applied to our objects in the scene. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can even be just colored materials with no textures. But assigning different materials for objects is very important, as all these materials will hold place and be replaced later by Lumion materials in Lumion. For example, this wall has a different material than this ground, or this paving, or this grass area, or the street. So each object will have its own material. So when we are in Lumion, we will simply replace them with Lumion materials. The second concept of how to prepare 3D files is to have the correct UVW mapping for our objects. That is how textures are oriented on that object, so it would be easier in Lumion to spread textures correctly on that object. For example, in 3ds Max, there is the UVW modifiers that controls scale and orientation of textures on objects. As we can see, its effects on this ground, so having UVs correct in your 3D software will save time and trouble when we are in Lumion. Concept number 3. Use Lumion library for common objects. Lumion has an amazing large library that we can take advantage of. We don't need to add shrubs, trees, lampposts, cars, people, street furniture, and a lot more of common objects that we can find in Lumion library with good materials, and some of them are even animated. That's why I meant to keep our 3D scene free of trees and other models that we can add later in Lumion. But for special designed models like this pergola or these sheds at the parking, I will leave them to be imported in my scene. Concept number 4. Be aware of the starting ground. When we import our scene into Lumion, most starting templates in Lumion will have infinite starting ground at the 0 level. So if we have, for example, our pavement level built at 0, the faces of the pavement and the already present Lumion ground will coexist exactly in the same height. And that will cause a problem called flickering. Lumion will be confused to show its ground or the pavement. So to prevent that, it's better to build our street level slightly higher than 0 to cover the starting Lumion ground. Another tip that will be useful in Lumion is to make the curbs button faces below the zero level. That will be very helpful when using the new displaced material in Lumion 10. It's a new feature that will let materials affect the surface it's applied on to give different height in 3D. But to make it correctly, we will have to cover this displacement at the edges with larger curves that covers the boundaries of these objects. We will go into details about that in materials, but let's do bigger curves for now that has their bottom faces below zero level. Concept number 5. It's always a good idea to model near the origin. When we import our 3D model in Lumion, Lumion will understand that its pivot point, the point where we move, rotate, and scale, is at the origin, where x equals 0, y equals 0. So if we are working in 3ds Max and our model is far away from the origin, that will cause it to be far away from its pivot point in Lumion, and moving, rotating, or scaling our imported model will be very annoying in Lumion. Concept number 6. For V-Ray users, V-Ray proxy doesn't work in Lumion. Lumion will not read V-Ray proxies or V-Ray materials. That's why in our case study model, we removed all V-Ray proxy objects like trees, cars, people, and other proxy objects, and we will replace them by objects from the Lumion library. Also, we have some grasses and landscape elements made by i2 Forest plugin in Max, and those will not be read in Lumion either. And we will replace them by Lumion grasses and landscape elements. Concept number 7. We can adjust and update models. Our start model doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We can start with a simple design and work on it in Lumion by adding materials, lighting, and other Lumion objects, and if something needs to be changed in the original model in Max or the other 3D software modeling, we can adjust it and update our model in Lumion without losing the work we did there. So don't worry, if you start your Lumion project with an incomplete model, adjusting stuff and updating our model in Lumion is very easy process. And I actually recommend to start simple with a simple model like we did in these garden spaces here. And later on in this course, we will see how to add details to our garden and update it. Concept number 8. .fbx is the universally accepted file format between 3D software. Although recently in the newer versions of Lumion, we can import .max files directly, but .fbx is the universal files format whether your 3D files are coming from 3ds Max, Revit, Cinema 4D, or other 3D modeling programs. That's why when we are ready to take our files into Lumion, we will go to Files, Export, and export our files to .fbx format. And that's all we need to take care of while preparing our 3D files. And we are now ready to go into Lumion and start the magic.